Hi there, and welcome to another Underproof workshop. Today's workshop is on working with others. We're going to be talking about everything it means to work with other creatives, from photographers to videographers to engineers and producers. All of these essential people you'll be working with as an artist, and how best to work with them. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Tom, I'm the music editor at Happy Mag.
I'm Dan, I'm the editor of More Audio and More Audio's in-house engineer.
Great, and we'll also be joined by a couple of people. Today we're going to be joined by Pat Ohara, who is a photographer based on the Northern Beaches, and we're going to be joined by Callum Howell, who is a mix engineer, a live engineer and a producer. He's been working with Ocean Alley and a couple of other Northern Beaches based bands for the last couple of years.
Cool.
And today, as always, we're going to be taking questions. So if you have any questions about anything that we talk about, just drop it into the comments and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Cool. Yes. Kicking things off, as I said, today we're talking about working with others. Now, making music, I think, to a lot of people can feel isolated, and a lot of maybe the narratives around being a musician can feel a bit isolating as well. Mm-hmm. But once you get into the business end of things, I don't think there are very many successful musicians out there who don't have a team of collaborators around them. So today we're going to be talking more on the creative end of the spectrum. There are important things to be said for management and publicity, but I think you'll probably agree here, Dan, that as an up-and-coming musician, the people that you need to worry about more initially are the creatives that you'll be
Absolutely.
working with.
Yeah, I think having a great team of creators around you will kind of spur you on until you can actually kind of climb that ladder and get to the part of your career where it actually turns into a business.
Yeah.
So it all comes from that initial spark.
Definitely. And, once you have a bit of momentum, then you can talk about engaging with a manager or a publicist. My only exception to that rule would be if in the very early stages of your band, you perhaps have a friend who wants to act as your manager, which can be a really useful endeavor. So by all means, go for it if that's an option for you. So first up, we're going to be talking to Pat Ohara. As I said, Pat is a photographer who is based in the Northern Beaches. He's worked with just about every punk and rock and roll band from the area. Currently, he's the touring photographer for Dear Seattle and a couple of other bands as well. So thanks for joining us, Pat. How are you going?
Hey there. Thanks for having me on, guys.
No worries. So could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your photography work?
My name is Pat Ohara. I am a photographer from Northern Beaches of Sydney, born and raised in Freshie. And I specialise in live music, mainly in like small, sweaty, intimate venues with local bands and like up and coming bands. That's sort of where my specialties lie. But I've done other things like big festivals and toured with bands around the world, I guess, and more often the country.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. So how did you meet most of the bands that you've worked with?
Through Instagram or like social media. When I was starting out, I literally just sent out so many messages to bands, just been like, hey, I love your stuff. Would you let me into a show to shoot you guys for free? Kind of thing. I'd only ever message bands that I really liked. It wasn't like just a blanket email to everyone. It was bands that I loved that I'd specifically seek out just to see if they'd have me on board. So I did that to Dear Seattle. And that's not how they came to know me. I met them through a mutual friend and then became their photographer through that. And then I had to tell them that I actually messaged them a while ago, and they looked at the screenshot and they still abused me for it because the message was just so cheesy and such like a 20-year-old thing to do. So that's still like a pretty funny laughing point. But so the three bands I work with are Dear Seattle, Slowly, and Sons of the East. Sons of the East I just messaged and they said, yeah, come along to a show. And then we just went from there. And then Slowly, actually, they were the ones to message me. And then from then on, it was kind of just kept working together.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people do use Instagram to make connections these days. It's really important for that. It can feel a bit nerve-wracking to reach out to a band that you love, but it's really important for photographers, and vice versa as well. Now, after doing all this work with all these bands, are there some things a musician should do to make sure they're ready for a photo shoot, and what kind of preparation do you think will get the most results?
So ideally before you get there and before the day of, you should have talked through the concepts and what you expect of the photographer and what you kind of want from them, and like maybe sent through a few like images, like inspiration images kind of thing that they can use and base their shoot off. I tend to, if it's a long shoot and like you want to do a few different locations, I'm thinking more like promotional photos kind of thing, because they're the ones you plan for. You can't really plan like music shots that much. If for the promo shoots, I'd be bringing a few different like sets of clothes, so it doesn't look like you've done this in the same photo session kind of thing. And then just that's pretty much it, really. I do a lot of my shoots off the cuff and just feel it out, see what the band is feeling. But that would be the best advice, I think, is just have like all your concepts and everything talked about beforehand, and then so everything that's left to do on the day is literally just take the photo and put the band in front in the spot and do that.
Are there any common faux pas that musicians might make when talking to a photographer? Something like a question that they should avoid?
Anything, I don't know if there is anything you shouldn't bring up with a photographer. It just depends on the person, really. Just don't ask questions that you wouldn't ask anyone else, really. Like, I love it when bands take an interest in what I do and like they ask about gear and shoots and concepts and what I'm thinking when I take a photo and stuff like that. I love that they get involved and take an interest in how I'm seeing things and how I'm sort of taking in the shot and what they're doing and why I'm asking them to do certain things. So I don't really think there's anything you shouldn't be asking your photographer, really. Maybe like how much they charge other bands kind of thing. I don't think that would differ, but it just depends on kind of thing. Maybe that's a thing that people get a bit iffy about, is just money. But that's really about it, I think.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. And last question for today. Since lots of young musicians will be using their close friends as photographers, what are some ways that they can give back without necessarily being able to afford budgets?
So I guess starting out, if you're using like your friends and like your like local photographers to help, get you started and stuff like that, you can't really pay them, because I guess like that's how I did it. I wasn't paid for a lot of the gigs when I first started out. The only thing you really can do is just make them feel a part of it, because that's all I really wanted when I was starting out, was just to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself, I guess. So being invited to like all the gigs and like just being treated like one of the band kind of thing. So like on equal footing, which is all the bands I work with, they're really, really good with that. Like just providing drinks and like food and like just making sure I'm okay with everything going on, sort of stuff like that. That's it, just make them feel appreciated kind of thing. Because if a lot of people are doing it for the experience when they start out, and if you can make that experience better or like just worthwhile, then there's just no amount of money that's worth that sort of thing. Like the relationships you build over a long period of time. The bands I've worked with, I've only started working with slowly for about like a year and a half now, but Dear Seattle and Sons of the East, I've been working with like 3+ years now each. And it's just developing that relationship where it's a mutual respect, but also mutual appreciation for what everyone does. It's like, it's a team, pretty much. You're all a team. And I guess the main goal is to just have a good time and do what's best for the band kind of thing. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, solid approach. Thanks for the chat, Pat.
Thanks for having me along. Wish you guys all the best in the future. Cheers.
You too, Pat. Thanks for joining us. Now, to continue down sort of that path that Pat set us on, we're going to be talking about the visual elements of being in a band. So as a sort of top-down view, that includes photography, videography, and design. So what will you need visual creatives to help you out with as a musician? The basics are EP or album covers, single covers too, video clips, press shots, and then more broadly, social media. You have these very important touch points when you release a single, when you release an album, but in the in-between stages, it's very good to have kind of a backlog of imagery that you can use. That's just, you might unexpectedly get asked to play a show. You might unexpectedly be doing a bit of press or get booked for an interview or something like that. So having a few images in the can for social media and other promotional stuff is always really useful. So in terms of finding the right person, finding someone who understands the vibe that you go for is essential. They'll be able to capture your look and feel and help you communicate a lot to your fan base in terms of what you want to actually communicate. I think certain genres and certain fields really have their own visual language. Like in terms of Pat, he shoots a lot of punk bands, a lot of sort of grimy, sweaty shows, and his black and white style really, really works well for that. And
Absolutely.
yeah, that might, not work for a solo singer-songwriter who's going much more for a festival, much more of a sunlight vibe. So finding someone who works well with you is important in photography and videography. But we'll speak about how finding someone who understands you as an artist and as a creative is important across all of these people that you'll be working with.
Absolutely.
And in terms of why you'll actually need this stuff, why are good visuals and good design important? So Dan, would it be fair to say that these days you can find out about a great band or a great artist from photos or a poster?
Absolutely. It would be your first connection with the band would most probably come through some sort of social media posts, and that might be something that the band curates themselves, or the band has worked with a professional photographer or someone involved in design. And even before you click play on Spotify, you've already got a sense of what this band might sound like if they get the branding right, and they can tell a story about their artistry without even hearing the music. And that I think is really important.
Yeah, definitely. First impressions, the old saying, you don't get a second chance at a first impression is so true. Mm-hmm. It stands so important in this field. We didn't mention merch before, but good design is obviously super important to merch. In terms of just seeing a band t-shirt that has a design that really calls out to you or really appeals to you, it can tell you a lot about the artist before you've even heard their song. And I think Dan will probably agree with me here, but there's so many instances where I've seen an album cover, or I've seen an EP cover, or I've seen a picture of somebody. And I think especially if you're in tune to kind of these things and you follow music a lot, like I said, certain things have a visual language associated with them, and you'll see a picture, you'll see a design. And if it's good picture or good design, you'll go, I kind of know what that band's going to be like already.
Yeah. And I think it's the start of that kind of tribal connection with the band that you might like, is associating with their imagery. So that's all part of it, aside from the music as well.
Definitely. And if a band has a great visual language about them, they have a great image of it, from start to finish, from their design to how they look to how they dress. That really inspires people, and people latch onto that, especially if fashion is a big part of what you're doing as an artist, what you wear, any way that you present yourself to the world. That can inspire people down the line. Just look at sort of fan art communities, look at people wearing the shirts and being influenced in terms of what they wear by their favorite artists. All that stuff is incredibly powerful, and when you nail it, it really does sort of deepen the relationship that your fans will have to you.
For sure.
In terms of finding these people, so in looking out for visual artists, for designers, for photographers and videographers that you want to work with, there's a few major touch points in terms of actually meeting them. For photographers especially, as Pat mentioned, shows are the big one. in playing shows, either because a photographer has a relationship with a venue that you're playing at, or they've reached out to you personally and they want to shoot your show because they like your band. It's great to say yes to these things because you never know when you might meet a Pat Ohara if you're Dear Seattle and suddenly you found the person who's shooting your shows for the next 2 years. Those people, you know, as Pat said, they want to be a part of it. They like what you do. So let them in. And if you like what they do as a photographer or as any creative, it can be the start of a really important relationship for you. Social media is the other big one, especially for visual stuff. Instagram is huge in terms of finding artists that you like. You might find someone that your friend follows who's a visual artist, who's a painter, who's a designer, who, you know, they might end up doing your next album cover if you like their stuff enough and you think it speaks to what you're doing musically. And as a last point there, seeing what other artists do, other musicians that is also really important. The amount of photographers, designers, etc., who just work exclusively in music, I think speaks to that, because, you know, a musician sees a photo of another musician or sees an album cover or sees a painting that's used somewhere, and then they say, damn, that really suits what I'm doing, and they reach out to the artist themselves, and again, a relationship blossoms from there. Cool, if you're just joining us, this is another Underproof workshop. Today we're talking about working with others, working with other creatives as a musician, and how important those relationships are, how to find them, and how best to work with these people. Underproof is a series put on by Happy Mag and the Northern Beaches Council. And if you're just joining us, we are taking questions. So anything that we've talked about, you want to ask a little bit more about, anything you want clarification on, just drop a question into the comments and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So moving on from the sort of visual side of things and to the audio, we're going to talk about recording. And we're going to start with a little Q&A with Callum Howell. Callum, as I mentioned, is an engineer and producer. He's currently based at Forbes Street Studios in Sydney. And for the last 5 years, he's worked with Ocean Alley in a number of different audio roles. And he's also recorded for a fair few other Northern Beaches bands, including Eagle Eye Jones and a few others. So hi, Callum. Thanks for joining us. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work?
Hey guys, my name's Howell and I've been working as a producer, engineer, front of house mixer and production manager for Ocean Alley for about the last 5 years, and I also work as a mixer and engineer based out of Forbes Street Studios in Sydney.
Awesome, thanks Callum. To kick things off, how should young musicians prepare for hitting the studio?
Lots of practice. We can do a lot of stuff now to cover up mistakes with digital audio workstations, etc., but still nothing beats a great performance. And the best way to get a great performance is to know your parts really well and be really comfortable playing them. If you're not comfortable, then you're going to be thinking about what you're supposed to be doing, you're going to be worrying about what everyone else is thinking, and it's not going to get a great performance. So that would be my main piece of advice, I think.
Practice is key for sure. And are there any other things a musician can do at home to prepare for the studio? You know, like a singer learning proper mic technique or a drummer learning how to tune their kit?
Yeah, so there are obviously lots of great resources online. YouTube, obviously, there's a couple of paid ones like Mix with the Masters and Pure Mix, which are both really good. But the best way to get better at this kind of stuff is to just get like an interface and start tuning your drums and recording them. Hearing what they sound like once you've tuned them. If you're a singer, getting a mic, plugging it in, hearing what happens when you move further and closer to a microphone. That's really the way to do it. I mean, nothing's going to replace actually practicing this stuff, but online is a really handy way to get the foundations of the techniques, I suppose, and to understand what you're trying to do. Nice.
And lastly, is there anything that a young musician should absolutely, under no circumstances, do when working with a producer or engineer?
No, I don't know if there's any absolute do not do's, but don't sneak up on people while they're mixing because you'll scare them. Otherwise, I think just be respectful and remember that the engineer is also someone who's working really hard to get the best out of your project, and that they are in many ways almost as invested as you are. So try and keep that in mind when you're dealing with them, and don't be rude when you're asking for mix revisions. If there's something that's not right, remember it's probably not a deliberate thing, it's just the way that they heard it. But there are obviously exceptions to every rule, but yeah, that's really all I can think of.
No, that's great, Cal. Thanks so much for joining us today, and have a good night.
Cheers, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Cal. Have a great night.
So moving on to recording, thanks for that, Callum. We're going to talk a bit more broadly about that sphere. So arguably the most important process of all as a musician, finding the right recording engineer can be really, really tough. You need to find someone that, again, understands your sound and really knows how to capture it. So where do I find an engineer, producer, or studio that I want to work in? We mentioned this briefly in the visual thing, but I think the big one is looking at other artists. The producer and engineer is a bit more of a silent role in music. I mean, you're credited on Spotify, you're credited everywhere else, but in terms of just being the face of that release, the engineer and producer take a bit more of a silent role. But with some research, look at the artists that you like, see who they're working with, and then that can be the basis for a lot of reaching out that you might do. Any advice for knowing whether someone will be right for you?
Well, like you said about finding bands that you'd like to associate with, especially their sound, and doing some deep digging and finding out who track their EPs or singles, and because it's a very small industry, and there's a few engineers that work with many different bands, so it won't be that hard to find the engineer that will be right for your sound if you're looking at a broad spectrum of bands to work with. That's the best business card that you can possibly have, is your last resume of your last session.
Yeah, definitely. And I think looking locally is really powerful as well. Just using Callum as an example, probably the amount of work that he's gotten from recording 2 Ocean Alley albums is off the charts.
Absolutely.
I know for a fact that there are a couple of bands, again based in the Northern Beaches, who have engaged him to mix or to help record, just because of that credit he's done. And everyone knows what Ocean Alley sounds like. A lot of people want to sound like them, or people want to sound like them mixed with somebody else. And again, that's just you reaching out to the engineer who's worked on an album or a record, any record that you love, and saying, I want a piece of that. I'd love to sound like that. Cool. And the other place is to, this is probably, again, for the earlier stages of your career where budgets are tight, but friends is a really good place to look as well. So everyone who's a musician, chances are they have a mate who's into recording or who's just has a budding interest in that side of things. If they're at the start of their recording career, giving them a low pressure job such as recording your demos can be really useful. It won't make or break you because they're not being really listened to outside of that small group of friends. And it's a great way to see if you two mesh when working together. It's a great experience for you, your mate, and probably your band. Sometimes it's actually the person in the band.
Of course,
as well. And once you found someone, what do you need to prepare? So this is a really important one. The first one is practice. Like Callum said, know your parts like the back of your hand. I think what Callum said is nothing beats a great performance, and
That's right.
I reckon you'd agree with that as well.
Absolutely. It's 99% of any great kind of tone that you can pull on any instrument is going to be from the musician themselves. So knowing your part and your role within the band, and what you can bring to a session is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think the tone thing bears mentioning as well, because what Callum said was sort of more broadly talking about the performance, but from a sound design perspective, what can, like, say, a guitarist or someone who's using a certain patch on a keyboard do to prepare?
I think, well, obviously making sure your gear is all up to scratch and there's nothing faulty happening is just step one. But also really kind of working in isolation on your particular sound. because that's the thing that's going to lend your band a certain edge. It's the band's, groups of individuals, so every individual can contribute in a massive way to bass tone, to drum tone, to guitar tone, to vocal tone. Never underestimate your contribution.
Great. A note, I think it's great. It's something you shouldn't be afraid of saying, is that it's your first time in the studio. Just in terms of the way you need to present your demos to your engineer, the language that you're using, some terms that you might not know. An engineer is there to have your back, so don't be afraid to mention that. It's not a weird thing to mention.
Yeah.
It can be really useful for an engineer to know that in a bunch of ways. And Dan, again, anything else in terms of ways a musician should prepare before putting in the studio?
Yeah, I think obviously being able to listen to yourself as much as you possibly can. So if you've got some sort of home recording setup, no matter how rudimentary it might be, being able to record and hone your parts at a very specific kind of level is really great. And then you'll be able to bring that sort of analytical ear to the studio, and you're not worried about just the whole band sounding good. You're more concerned with your individual tone and what you can bring to the studio in your own instrument or sound.
Sure. A question that we've had before, so it's not technically working with others, but it bears mentioning here. How far do you think, as a sort of up-and-coming band, can you take recording at home these days?
Absolutely, all the way to the top. It's really, there's no shortage of tools, and so many young kids are super savvy with recording at home these days, and being able to kind of shape your own tone and have your own sonic identity is well within the grasp, I would say, of most people nowadays. It's just being able to put in the time to learn some of these tools, and taking a real interest in listening to your favorite records and finding out how did they do that. That's a really fascinating kind of pursuit in any way.
Yeah, cool. And a lot of bands these days who are recording at home are still engaging a professional engineer for the final stage of their song, which is the mixing and the mastering stage, which I recommend. I mean, not everyone can afford that, but it's really important. Dan, quick explanation of mixing and mastering.
Yeah, so mixing is kind of grabbing all the sounds that you've already recorded and putting them together and making it sound great. And mastering, again, is the final touch. Beyond that is usually more relevant to a body of work. So say if you've got an EP and you want all the tonal kind of language of the whole album to work really well together, mastering is super important. But beyond that, just having an extra pair of ears on your sound is critical. So even as a critique is going to make your first sounds better.
Yeah, definitely. This is the working with others workshop, and I think that point applies really broadly. Even if they're not creatives, even they're just friends who you have whose taste you really trust, having someone who's a third party to bounce off ideas with, to show them the design of your album, to show them what your tour poster looks like, can be so useful, because your band, and especially if you're just working for yourself, making music yourself, that is, can be a bit of an echo chamber. So getting out of that one every once in a while, getting another opinion, whether it's a mixing engineer or whether it's just a mate, can be super useful. And having friends like that you can trust is really, really helpful. Cool, so that about winds it up for us today. This has been the Working with Others Underproof workshop. Underproof is a yearly initiative that's Happy Mag and the Northern Beaches Council. It's a series of workshops that all lead up to a big gig. This year it's happening in November, and it's 5 bands with under 500 Facebook likes supporting a really big headliner. That's coming up in November. We'll drop a link to Underproof below so you can find out a bit more about it. And the next workshop that we're going to be doing is called Getting Physical, and it's happening the same time next week on August 12th. So it's all about the real world stuff, to put it broadly. Vinyl, postering, tapes, merch, all of that stuff. How to start making it, how to make sure it pops, and how to get the best out of your physical stuff as well. So see you then. And for today, thanks for joining us. I'm Tom Cameron.
I'm Dan Shaw.
See you next time.
Bye.